So what could be better fitting after all these YouTubes on creationism versus evolution and the catastrophic worldwide flood versus uniformitarianism and so on, than to put Darwin back in the picture, who seems to be the key figure way back when. Of course, he stole his ideas from others as well. Marvin L. Lubenow, Bones of Contention. Now allow me to quote Darwin. But just in proportion as this process, Darwin is writing now, as this process of extermination has acted on an enormous scale, so must the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this, perhaps, is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory. That's his theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. So if it's so extreme, why do you go by it so dogmatically? And we see it's so chock full of errors and contradictions. One time one fossil leaves another time one goes before it or after it. Darwin said that the number of intermediate fossil forms fossilized in the rocks must be enormous, that they have not been found, that their absence is the most serious objection one could have against his theory. Yeah, what about the missing links between one thing and another? And that they have not been found only because of the imperfection of the fossil record. Wow. Darwin felt that the fossil evidence was so important, and the lack of transitions was such a serious threat to his theory, that he devoted an entire chapter in The Origin to the imperfection of the geological record. A whole chapter. He didn't just hint at it here and there. For 100 years, evolutionists paraded the fossils they found as evidence for evolution. But it was imperfect. I wouldn't parade that. In the early 1970s, when it became obvious that we had a more than adequate sampling of the fossil record, at least to determine whether or not it's accurate, the grim reality dawned that those transitional fossils were not to be found. You had quantities and quantities of fossils, same and different, but no connection between one fossil and another. The punctuated equilibrium model of evolution was then invented to explain why they were not formed. Punctuated. Well, let's just see. What do you know? Punctuated equilibrium. Wikipedia. In evolutionary biology, punctuated equilibrium, also called punctuated equilibria, is a theory that proposes that once a species appears in the fossil record, the population will become stable, showing little evolutionary change for most of its geological history. This state of little or no morphological change is called punctuated equilibrium model. Consists of morphological stability followed by rare bursts of evolutionary change via rapid cladogenesis, vertical equilibrium, states separated by horizontal jump phases. In contrast, phyletic gradualism below is a more gradual, continuous model of evolution with accumulation of small incremental changes represented by slanted bars that split at branch points, where two separate modes of life are feasible, but of which each prospers best with divergent specializations. So this state of little or no morphological change is called stasis. When significant evolutionary change occurs, the theory proposes that it is generally restricted to rare and geologically rapid events as branching speciation called cladogenesis. Cladogenesis is the process by which species splits into two distinct species rather than one species, gradually transforming into another. So, it sounds like nonsense to me. Punctuated equilibrium is commonly contrasted with phyletic gradualism, the idea that evolution generally occurs uniformly by the steady and gradual transformation of whole lineages. So, in 1972, paleontologists Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould published a landmark paper developing their theory and called it punctuated equilibria, built upon Ernest May's model of geographic speciation. So they proposed that the degree of gradualism commonly attributed to Charles Darwin is virtually non-existent in the fossil record. Yeah, and he said that himself, and that species dominates the history of most fossil species. So the sudden appearances of species and its relationship to speciation was proposed and identified by Mayer, and historians of science generally recognized by Eldredge and Gould's paper as the basis of the new paleobiological research program. Where did it come from? The answer? We don't know. It's there. It's between the rocks. So it must be the only theory ever put forth in the history of science which claims to be scientific, but then explains why evidence for it cannot be found. Let me read that again. It must be the only theory ever put forth in the history of science which claims to be scientific, but then explains why evidence for it cannot be found. Amazing. I might copy this down here and put it in. So the popular myth is that the hominid fossil evidence virtually proves human evolution. The reality is that this evidence has been a disappointment to evolutionists. Not only a disappointment, it doesn't exist and is being de-emphasized. They found nothing connecting it. In actuality, the human fossil evidence falsifies the concept of evolution. The Bible, the Word of God, the living God, clearly declares that humans were specially created. And we see that because we find nothing close to it in superiority and capacity, in design, nothing close to it. The human fossil evidence is completely in accord, however, with what the scriptures teach. Lubenow goes on to say, many think of Darwin as a religious man. He studied for the ministry at Cambridge. His wife, Emma Wedgwood, daughter of Hosea Wedgwood, and maker of Wedgwood China, seems to have been an evangelical Christian, although also Darwin refers to the origin to creation and to God. There are even reports that toward the end of his life, Darwin experienced a new birth. Unfortunately, all of this gives a false impression. It was parental influence that caused Darwin to study for the ministry. Even in his early years, Darwin's personal commitment to orthodoxy, whatever that means, because sometimes commitment to orthodoxy means that you're not a Christian either. It just depends which orthodoxy. Even in his early years, Darwin's personal commitment to orthodoxy seems to have been minimal. Emma's influence upon Darwin was basically one of restraint. He never shared her faith and often softened expressions of his opposing views out of respect for her. His references to creation and the origin were highly critical of that doctrine. And His references to God were only those of a theist, not those of an Orthodox Christian. Darwin's spiritual journey was actually a journey in reverse. He moved from an anemic orthodoxy, at best, in his early years to a non-orthodox theism in his middle years, to agnosticism in his senior years. It is inaccurate to ever describe Darwin as an atheist. However, the influence of evolution upon him was fatal. So if you're a theist, and I'm not so sure that the leaders of our country, Washington, Jefferson, and others, who often mention Jesus and the Bible, they were more or less theistic evolutionists, not willing, perhaps, to go the route of an actual 6-year, 24-hour-day creationism. 24-hour-day creationism. It would be difficult to show a relationship between Darwin's commitment to evolution and his rejection of biblical Christianity, which he rejected. Reports of Darwin's alleged conversion have been common in some evangelical circles for many years, but they were non-existent. Not only was Darwin said to have experienced the new birth, but he was also reported to have repudiated his writings in evolution. I have personally seen tracts making these claims. As much as we might wish that these reports were true, I am sorry to say that they are actually false, since none of Darwin's biographers report any such experience, and there are no other records of it, and about the only way to verify such an event would be through his personal correspondence. In 1919, Darwin's son, Francis, published a biography of his father, together with a collection of his father's correspondence. Francis Darwin, 1919. A study of the letters written by Charles Darwin between the time of his alleged conversion and the time of his death clearly reveals that he experienced no such change of mind and heart. Well, change of mind and heart, they're the same thing. Not only is there a total lack in these letters of any reference to a conversion to Christ, there are many positive expressions of his continued faith in evolution. As far as can be determined, Darwin remained an evolutionist and an agnostic to the day of his death. It is a misunderstanding to think there is evidence from Darwin's life that evolution is compatible with biblical Christianity. The second major misunderstanding of Charles Darwin concerns the nature of his accomplishments. While it is commonly thought that his major work was an attempt to put the concept of evolution on a solid scientific foundation, that was only a secondary matter. The scientific evidence for evolution was not that impressive. Darwin's major accomplishment was not in the area of science, but in the area of philosophy. Allow me to quote one of the world's leading biologists, Ernest Mayr, Harvard University. Nothing could be more wrong than the immemorial assertion Darwin was no philosopher. One must grant Darwin's opponents the validity of two of their objections. First, Darwin produced embarrassingly little concrete evidence to back up some of his most important claims. This includes the change of one species into another in succeeding geological strata, or the production of new structures and taxonomic types by natural selection. Most importantly, Darwin left totally unanswered certain serious problems like the origin of life and of new genetic variation. Ernest Mayr.